The lies piled up like crazy, and I still kept going back. We didn't know those darker words for a person like Ricky, you know? Words like sociopath or worse. When I got there to Ash's place, our old place, it was a good few smokes before he'd actually come out and say it. Ricky. The truth about Ricky at last. Except that was the thing. No one, literally no one knew the truth. The guy was a ghost, a mirage, shimmering like a holograph, different from every angle, different to every person, different for every person. Ricky was supernatural, just like I said. He couldn't tell anyone the truth about his life. So here's all anyone knew. So hello, you wonderful human of the internet, and welcome back to another chapter of the Nostalgia Project. I was going for trying to look like my younger self here, and I've come out looking like a 5-year-old going to a dance rehearsal, but there we go. And swoop, welcome to my albino ass redoing this intro because I completely ballsed it up and just waffled on and on and on about nonsense. So essentially, if you saw the last chapter, and it's not essential that you did, but if you did, you will know that there was a certain mysterious individual who came into me and my friends' lives when I was 19 years old, and he presented us with this handful of ecstasy pills. None of us had ever taken anything of the sort before, but it completely rejigged the dynamic of our friendship group. Like suddenly our lives were just all about this drug, and that was everything our lives were about. So there's kind of a bit of that in this chapter, but mostly this chapter is about the guy, the mysterious new guy that I'm calling Ricky. That is a fake name to protect his identity, but he got with my ex first, Ash, and it was weird how perfect their relationship was. That Ash had all these traumas in his past, and Ricky just coincidentally had so many of the same traumas. It was freaky how perfect they were for each other. I was only 19, like say, I didn't know to be suspicious of a person who is a perfect mirror for you at all times. Like, you have a trauma and you speak about it, they have exactly the same kind of thing go on, and there's so many coincidences. Everything you say, they mirror it. Be suspicious of that, because this was the kind of thing that was the first red flag with Ricky. And I don't know to this day what was his damage. Was he a sociopath or antisocial personality disorder, as it's technically called? And I apologize for using the old terminology, but not everyone knows the new one. What was his damage? I don't know, but this chapter is about him, about how we found out that things were not as they seemed with this guy, and then where everything went on the scene with this guy in its midst, and certain things I did that I am very much not proud of. And yeah, that's this chapter. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up and give you the video. So this chapter is simply called The Second Secret, as it is the second huge secret that I kept from Ash, who was the most important boy in my world for like 13 years or more. And this is the second huge secret I kept from him. If you want to know the first one, I will link the playlist below of all these stories. So yeah, without further ado, this is The Second Secret. Whoosh. Ricky. I told you he was supernatural. That's not a lie. But there are some laws of physics even he couldn't break. Time, for instance. Ecstasy is magic. The way it bonds people together makes them love and trust more deeply than you could ever imagine. Stops them seeing the superhuman being in their midst. But it still takes time before that trust becomes permanent, unquestioning. You don't mind, of course. Who could possibly mind spending extra time on ecstasy? As Ash and Ricky's relationship blossomed, we carried on hanging out together, but we were always getting high in clubs now. I'd hated it last time, had a couple of ambivalent to good experiences, and I was willing to give it just one final go. So Ricky gave me an extra pill to keep, to take home, all ready to swallow just before we next met up at Fang's Friday night goth shite. On the night of Gothshite, I got ready in my bedroom, crimping my hair, zipping myself into skin-tight PVC, buckling all 16 straps on my most ridiculous boots. Then I went downstairs, and as my stepdad found his car keys, I slipped into our tiny downstairs toilet and swallowed that little white pill. The drive took half an hour. After all, I'd come up exactly as I walked in the door of the venue. Or at least, that was the plan. I didn't yet know that the half-hour rule was more a flimsy guideline than a stone tablet act of God. I hadn't accounted for my stepdad's ponderous driving, or maybe it was just my tendency to starve myself on clubbing days to keep a flat stomach, or my morning skinny, as the kids on TikTok call it now. But either way, the pill kicked in just as we were driving up the beginning of the Bristol Road, fucking miles from the venue, and I came up harder than with any pill I'd ever taken before, right there in the car with my stepdad. It was only around 8 p.m, early summer, and I still remember the sunlit road outside as it warped, vibrated, wibbled, my teeth crunching together, and I was hit by a wave of dizziness so intense I had to flop over forwards, pretending to adjust my boot buckles while the blood returned to my head. The rest of the drive was a surreal spinning whirlwind, and I tried to say nothing at all lest I give myself away, which wasn't hard given my jaw was basically clamped together anyway. But I got away with it yet again. The car spat me out at the venue and in I went. Gothshite, I would quickly learn, was not a good place for an autistic person, perhaps any person, to roll. There was only one room, one source of music, so if you didn't like that song and both your friends were snogging or deep talking, which they always were, you just had to stand there feeling like a lonesome, unlovable prat. And just like I said, ecstasy enhances everything, including your feelings of boredom, awkwardness, and rejection. As the night wore on, I felt weirder and weirder, and finally I started bugging Ricky for my promised and paid for second pill. Eventually he coughed up, and I took it, figuring it couldn't make anything worse, could it? I'd never done 2 pills in a night before, but this night sucked. I barely survived the club and getting a lift home, and then everything was made better once I went to bed, and as I lay vibrating in the dark, these glowing LED Mardi Gras masks started whirling through the darkness towards me, some happy, some tragic, all shifting lurid rainbow shades. It was just a magic experience. They were so real I could reach out and touch them. But the night out that preceded it had been so bad, so lonely and boring and awful. I stopped going out, stopped doing pills, went back to my eating disorder full time, and let Ash and Ricky get on with whatever the fuck they wanted to get on with. It wasn't until a particularly intense drug flashback on holiday in Sussex that I rethought this decision about 8 weeks later. I'd been wandering the aisles of a supermarket near our holiday cottage hunting for binge food when Blue Monday came on the radio. And instantly I was back there in the dark depths of a club, off my tits on pills, dancing in the neon magic of ecstasy. And I had what we all used to call a serotonin dump. When you're doing E every weekend, it totally messes up your serotonin levels. You essentially become manic depressive, bipolar. The come downs are crushing for some people, but for me, I was already depressed and they barely made a dent. But if you get excited by anything in the weeks that follow doing an ecstasy pill, your brain flashes you right back to Ecstasy Town and you get this serotonin dump straight from heaven. You become totally manic, wired, ecstatic. It's almost indistinguishable from the effects of an actual pill sometimes for a few minutes. And that was what happened in that Sussex supermarket. I suddenly missed like hell the times we'd had, Ash and Ricky and Jack and me, and the club nights and the airwaves black and the music and the feeling. I had to have it back. So as soon as I got home with my family, I spoke to Ash about what was happening next weekend. It was completely out of character for Ash now. when he said he just fancied a quiet one. Would I come round, hang out, get stoned, sleep over? Just the two of us? Ash had become a whole different person on that weekly ecstasy regime. Dating Ricky, he'd started wearing a cowboy hat and almost nothing else to clubs, had ambitions of quitting his job completely to become a gay cowboy stripper, doing nothing all weekend but dropping pills and dancing and flirting and kissing. It's every rave kiddie's dream while you're in the honeymoon phase. You think you've found this whole new way of life, and you can't even conceive of the fact that it will, or even could, ever end. But this weekend, Ash just wanted to stay in with me, apparently. That was the way it always used to be when something was up with him. That was the way it would be for the next decade. When I got there to Ash's place, our old place, it was a good few smokes before he'd actually come out and say it. Ricky. The truth about Ricky at last. Except that was the thing. No one, literally no one knew the truth. Any truths about Ricky. Were they broken up then? I asked. Not as such, said Ash. They were just dodging each other, which, knowing Ash and knowing Ricky, meant that Ash was desperate for answers and closure and reassurance, while Ricky was playing dodgeball like his life depended on it. Because in a big kind of way, it really did. Ricky was supernatural, just like I said. He couldn't tell anyone the truth about his life. So here's all anyone knew. It had started to unravel with something as stupid as an ID card dropped in Ricky's typically clumsy fashion on Ash's kitchen floor. When Ash found it, the birthday it gave didn't match up with what Ricky had told him. Not the date, not even the year. And it wasn't just some fake ID, because it went backwards. Instead of 22, like he'd said, Ricky was just 19, same as me. And of course, once Ash knew that, it threw everything else out of whack. Because Ricky had plenty of stories about university, about all the years he'd done there. There'd been traumas woven into those stories that he and Ash had bonded over hardcore, wept together on the kitchen floor about, only how did they ever happen if Ricky wasn't even old enough to have lived through those uni years? So Ash got suspicious, started asking questions of other people who knew Ricky, and nothing added up. The guy was a ghost, a mirage, shimmering like a holograph, different from every angle, different to every person, different for every person. Whatever Ash had mentioned going through, Ricky had immediately spun up a story of something similar, some eerie traumatic mirror to relate through, which meant that Ricky knew everything, literally everything about Ash, maybe even more than I did, while all Ash knew about Ricky were the false truths and sentimental bonding narratives he'd been spun. It was calculated as fuck, sinister beyond all words, but we still didn't see it. We were still too young, too full of leftover ecstasy and pathogen memories to see it. We didn't know those darker words for a person like Ricky, you know? Words like sociopath, or worse. A talent for deceit that outstrips all normal humans. All we could think was that he was just insecure. He just wanted to be liked, that's all, right? He was hiding something, but probably just his own fragility. Because what else could there be? Why would a person lie for nothing more than fun? Personal gain didn't even cross our minds. That wasn't a part of our empathogen world. Peace, love, unity, respect. It was exactly the kind of crap candy raver kiddies come out with instead of seeing the truth and running a mile. Maybe that's why Ricky led all his friendships with a free ecstasy pill. Anyway, it broke Ash pretty fucking hard. I told you already. about that magnet for disaster he had stuck in his chest? Well, Ricky was just another piece of junk metal that got sucked in and sliced up his heart. So Ash started dating this kid, another 16-year-old like I'd been, Lara. And I don't know if it was a conscious decision to go for someone so young, even now he was 23, that maybe a 16-year-old girl wouldn't be so manipulative, or whether it was just that dating me had set Ash's type in stone just the same way dating him would forever give me a thing for skinny, shy goth boys. But Lara was no kind of innocent. God only knows what her damage was, but she subjected him to quite a few black-eyed child screaming rage uber tantrums, and she treated her mum like some kind of garbage hobo for beating black and blue. The one thing that really came out of their tumultuous affair was that she made Ash swear on his mum's life or something equally sacred, I could never even get him to confess, that he would never, ever again take a Class A drug. So that was that for Ash and the pills and the gay cowboy stripper phase, which might have been a good thing, because Ricky, it didn't fucking matter. It did not matter a jot that the entire scene now knew Ricky was full of shit about every single thing. He'd started DJing, keeping the scene afloat, hosting nights, and while he was no great shakes as a DJ, mostly nicking goth mix tracks online and pretending they were his, or fucking up the beat matching till even an epileptic couldn't dance to what the speakers were stuttering out. This was the cusp of 2005, and the goth scene was still buzzing. People needed places to go, and no one cared about perfection or even, it would seem, basic honesty. And me. Well, what the fuck do you think I cared about? I wasn't the one to date that nutter Lara and swear on Satan's ballsack that I'd go straight. I cared about getting right back to where we'd been before, which was experiencing a 5-hour window of actual happiness every weekend after a decade in the dark of depression. Where else was I meant to go for the source of that happiness? Ricky, as ever, be he sociopath or shy, confused, delicate, held all the cards. Maybe it would have been forgivable if he'd just been my dealer, if I'd simply used him like he'd used Ash. But don't you understand yet? That's not how ecstasy works. Not on a semi-normal, non-sociopathic brain. Ricky would play elusive, only ever dealing to me from the DJ booth, so I'd have to turn up to even the quiet club nights, where often the only person I knew would be Ricky. So I'd be rolling and he'd be rolling and we'd chat to each other. At first my walls were as up as any walls can be on E. Like the night I was telling Ricky about my horse, and he immediately told me about his horses back in Italy. Only there was no way he could bullshit his way through horse stuff to an actual horse person when he'd clearly never touched one in his life. And I rolled my eyes inside my mind, thought, yup, more bullshit, and changed the subject. But Ricky was what Ricky was. There was something so impossibly endearing about him. In this hapless, clumsy, perpetually wasted sort of way. He was a good dancer too. We spent a lot of nights dancing together. He had this sort of industrial dance, trad goth, two-step crossover, always performed with maximum casualness and a cigarette in one hand. And he had this smile, man. This wide-open, childlike smile. I bet that fucker practiced it in the mirror, looking back. And he had those big, dark Italian eyes, and while I knew full well there was no way in logical hell I should ever involve emotions, like love, when it came to Ricky, nonetheless, I came to like him a lot. And pretty soon those conversations in the corners of goth clubs turned into makeout sessions. His tongue was always cold and fizzy with Red Bull, and my mouth tasted like Airwaves Black, and we'd share cigarettes outside the bathrooms until pretty soon it was like, come back to mine. Come have an after party, because Ricky lived with this guy who just went by the name Chaos. So it wasn't like it was a date or anything serious. It was just a hangout, a cuddle puddle, a pilled up group thing. And that was exactly the way I loved doing pills, as Ricky knew full well. In a house with friends, more conversation than dancing. So one night when the club closed and we spilled out into the clove smoke darkness of John Bright Street, I went back with them. And maybe Ricky has a lot more to answer for than just what he did to Ash, because he pushed me across a great big line in the sand that night too. I still remember that first time in Ricky's room, Chaos hanging out on the corner of the bed, grinning from behind his dreadlocks. We'd just got in and they'd helped me unbuckle all the 16 buckles on my boots. The pills that night were pink and heart-shaped. Appropriate. And Ricky held one out to me, offered it for free. I was baffled. Taking another pill after the club? Why would anyone do that? It sounds so dumb now, but I was still treating nights on E like they were drinking nights. I'd come home, then I'd just get in bed and try to sleep. I didn't yet know that the magic could be prolonged, extended, worn thin, and that the real party could start after the club was through. If I'd never crossed that line, if I'd kept pills in the club where they belong, I think everything in my world might be a whole lot different today. But I was young and Ricky knew more about drugs, always. So I took that pill. Then we all sat on the bed round a laptop playing music. And we chatted and chatted, getting faster and deeper and more connected, yet forgetting every sentence as soon as it was spoken. And at 4 a.m, I pulled out my bag of chewy, sugar-spangled candies, as was my habit, started munching away, trusting the E to burn off the extra calories, even as Chaos grimaced and wondered how in hell I could eat at all on E. And finally, Chaos went to bed. Then it was just the two of us, Ricky and me. I could have slept on the sofa, I guess. But I didn't. I don't think Ash even crossed my mind. It's only just occurring to me right now, 17 years later, that I'd never had sex with anyone on E before. That makes it even worse, doesn't it? If it was anyone, it should have been Ash. It should have been Ash. Sex on E is a whole new kind of virginity, and I lost it to fucking Ricky. Knowing precisely who and what he was. I remember it so clearly, even now. He had a Prince Albert piercing, a ring through his dick. That was another first for me. I didn't go down on him. I was too afraid of gurning hard and biting his dick off. Maybe he deserved it. Plus, I had 2 piercings in my tongue, and we might have gotten horribly hooked up and been too high to sort out. But we had sex. Ecstasy sex. Honestly, it's a bit overrated. It's basically impossible to climax, but if it's good, every movement can feel like a climax. And with Ricky, it was pretty good. Didn't move mountains, but I still remember that wide open smile so close to me, and those big dark eyes made all the bigger and darker for his dilated pupils, my fingers tangled in that curling Italian hair. And I don't reckon I thought about Ash even once. Ash had abandoned this lifestyle. He'd gotten off the ride way before I was ready to. There's nothing personal. But would you see it that way? If you knew? Do you think he would or will if he ever reads this book? I doubt it. When we were done, we curled up with the music still playing. It was Colony 5, a band I'd previously detested for their pretentious lyrics and uptight-sounding vocalist, but that night zonked out on more ecstasy than I'd ever taken before. It wove magic in my mind. I saw knights on horseback, princesses in castle turrets, dragons and romantic rescues and medieval weddings. I fell in love with them forever after that. Their sugar candy rain synths and eloquent lyrics were crafted for ecstasy visions, like synchronized hearts, two robots making synthetic love in the secret darkness of the human world. Maybe that's exactly what we were doing, Ricky and me. Everything about him was synthetic. And in the midst of something as true and beautiful as an ecstasy high, I was getting it on with the guy who just sliced a bleeding gash out of the most important boy in my world. We were both still-hearted robots, out for what we could get. But you know what's even worse? Even worse? It wasn't just that once, like some little oops on the timeline of me and Ash. It was a few times. Ricky and I were together every weekend, weren't we? Fuckers gonna fuck, I guess. The lies piled up like crazy, and I still kept going back. Ricky claimed to drive this goddamn silver Ferrari that was parked outside his house, but when I asked him to take me for a spin, of course he'd lost the keys. Was it even his? His parents? Just a lucky neighborhood item? God only knows. Reality blurred more and more with every time I saw him. He got a girlfriend after a while, Kat, and the lies reached a level I don't understand to this very day. I'd walk into the goth club and find Ricky for my pills, then ask if we were going back to his later, and he'd say, yeah, I broke up with Kat, come back with me. Then literally 5 seconds later, as I was still standing there, Kat would saunter up, nothing amiss, and he'd kiss her right in front of me. This happened at least 3 times. He never expected to get away with it, that lie, but the natural human shame, guilt, and awkwardness in being caught out were just missing in Ricky. Like I said, he was superhuman. He was something else. He didn't give a shit about other people's feelings, plans, lives. He just said whatever would get him 5 seconds or a few weeks of basking in positive attention. Honestly, I wondered, and still do, how the hell Kat could actually date him. Like, I was happy enough to fuck the guy when it came with a side order of pills and conversation, but to literally get with, fall in love with, a guy who was nothing more than an ever-shifting illusion, like glitching computer code? Never understood it. Kat was hot as hell and a great dancer. Anyone would have gone for her. She chose Ricky. I wasn't the only idiot in the room when it came to those big dark Italian eyes. I never got to hear what version of him she was actually dating. Sometimes Ricky wasn't even Italian. He was Polish for a while. Lately, I think he's pretending to be from Turkey or something for whatever that buys him. But the trouble with being Ricky is you tell so many lies, no one fucking knows when something's actually true. Last I heard, he was having chemo. Like, for cancer. And the crazy thing is, there was a whole stream of, oh no, and get well soon comments. And I just couldn't bring myself to drop one. Because if there's one lie I'm not getting sucked into after all these fucking years of Ricky's bullshit, it's being a cancer patient. If you can lie about your parents' tragic demise or being practically raped by an older man, or any of the other shit I suspect Ricky told Ash to win him over, then cancer's a walk in the park to lie about. Yet somehow, even after all these years, even with everyone on the scene knowing, Ricky never finds himself alone. He'll shift names just slightly, just enough. Shift nationalities, find a new group, or put on a new club night. Make himself vital to you somehow. And once you see him, or speak to him, that easy Italian charm's still there, and that smile's as wide and open as ever, and you flash back to a million neon midnights, the taste of Red Bull on his tongue, the shared cigarettes, and the way he'd reach out and run his fingers down your skinny teenage stomach every time Depeche Mode sang, "Reach out and touch me," and that'd be it. You'd be back in his web. It'd even feel good. He still looks young to me. I still see him through the mist of my memories. He was the beating heart of my ecstasy land for so long. How can I ever wipe that away? I'd probably go to his funeral, honestly, if the cancer's real and it ends him. That's just what Ricky is. He's not human, but he still gets in your bones. I think the only time his lies really, really fucked me off was when he seemed to find himself unable to score pills anymore. And that fucker would not admit to it. Not Ricky, the cool one, the one who held all the cards, the one the party depended on, music man and dealer all rolled into one. So I went out to a house party one night purely to see Ricky, get my pills, then have a great night. But every time I tracked him down, he'd say, "They're in Jane's room, in my coat pocket, and she's really, really anti-drug. We have to be subtle about this. Give me time." Which went on for 3 freaking hours until it was, "Shit, I can't find them. They've fallen out of my pocket, and you know what Jane's like. I'll look when I can." Which went on for another 3 hours until I lost my shit completely and just left, having had a rotten fucking night. There were never any pills, that was obvious. He pulled the same shit at the goth club the next week, leaving me hanging, then texting to say there was a crisis and he wasn't coming. I was beyond fucking furious. The night being worth going to depended on having pills in its entirety. I kicked the shit out of the sanitary towel bin in the bathrooms with my hefty New Rocks, then made out with this teenage girl who threw herself at me on the Rock Room dance floor. Any distraction, any at all. But she was wasted and very young. Her friends dragged her away, leaving me fuming and alone. When I got on instant messenger with Ricky the next weekend, he couldn't come out because he'd been chasing the dragon with a friend all night and was too hungover to move. Bullshit. It always had to be something cool, though, with Ricky, something debauched, his reason for not showing up with the goods, when the truth had to have been that he'd just lost all his contacts in the drug world. So you'd think that'd be it, right? End of chapter? End of phase? Like it was for Ash? Of course not. Ash had an addictive personality, sure, but he cared about that. Cared about dodging that. He had to. There were heavy, heavy skeletons in Ash's family tree that I'm not going to share here, my final act of respect for him. But Ash had gone all his life knowing just how dark drugs could get. So yeah, he was careful. Whenever he felt himself getting too fond of anything, he ran like hell. Except when it came to love, of course, but you already know that. Me, though, I never cared. I never gave a shit about ending up an addict. Not if it was the only way I was happy. I never had any sense of danger. And that being so, where there's a will, there's a way. My will was sharpened to a lethal point by now. Months of bliss followed by weeks of Ricky's fuckabouts. I had to find a solution somehow. And the thing is, you don't even have to go fishing for drugs. Not once you're into them. That's the magical, dangerous thing. Whatever drug you're into, it tends to show. These days, I have intense druggy-dar. I can spot a junkie or a pill-happy radar a mile off. But I couldn't back then. I didn't know who to ask. But it turned out I didn't even have to, because it just showed on me. My hair was pretty much a rainbow by then, along with my nails and makeup. The more ecstasy you consume, the more colourful you get. Unbreakable rule, I swear. Then there's the fact I was unhealthily skinny, the right sort of age for club drugs, and pretty soon I made other people's drug dars go ping, ping, ping. Finding my next dealer? All it took was 3 little words. 3 quite strange words, admittedly. "Smell my bag," he stage whispered in my direction, grinning widely. "What?" I said, laughing. We were at the skate park where I worked, coming to the end of a late shift, and it was my first time meeting one of the ramp builders, Mark. I was so naive to finding a dealer. Even seeing this guy's full-on Rasta stylistics didn't tip me off to what might be in the bag. "Smell my bag," he repeated, practically dancing with excitement. I really came to love Mark. Not like that, but just, he was a cool guy. A ray of fucking sunshine, always. So I sniffed his backpack. It reeked of weed. That proper gorgeous hybrid weed that has all the citrus tang of sativa, yet all the skunky funkiness of indica, mingled together like all of fucking Amsterdam had been rolled up and stuffed into Mark's rucksack. I bliss moaned my approval, and he cracked it open, revealed the whole thing stuffed with 8th bags of weed. I bought 2, and pretty soon after that, I asked if he could get anything else. Turned out, Mark could get more or less anything. A one-man show as web-connected as a dreadlocked Spider-Man. The good times of 2005 were about to start, in all senses of the word, rolling. Finally, fucking finally, I could be done with all Ricky's bullshit. And Ash, well, at least Ash didn't ever have to find out that I'd stuck the knife in and twisted it. But maybe he suspected. I reckon he did, 'cause he wasn't doing all right round then. Not all right at all. Who knows when it happened? Was I making out with Ricky right then? Was I curled up in his bed? Was I driving home from the skate park, carefree with a fresh bag of Mark's pungent weed? I don't know. But wherever I was, Ash was walking round his house with a tearful note in one hand and a dressing gown cord looped around his neck, looking for something to hang from. And I wasn't there to stop him. Which is our slightly depressing, anxiety-provoking ending for this one. Yeah. It's weird writing and reading this, particularly thinking, dude, you didn't need Ricky anymore. At like the beginning, the cusp of 2005, you didn't need Ricky anymore. Now it's 2021. You're still friends with the guy. That's how deep this dude gets in your bones. Everyone on the scene knows that. Well, I mean, back then, what we compulsive liar was the buzzword, the word that everyone used. And these days, obviously, there's more awareness about, the darker mental illnesses. I think sociopathy, psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, I think that's it, isn't it? ASPD, is what you're supposed to call it now. Does he have that? I don't know, because I don't think compulsive liar is actually a condition that exists on its own. I think it's a part of other conditions. I have never seen or heard of Ricky doing anything dangerous to anyone. Like, I don't think he's like a dangerous sort of ASPD person, unless you count what he did to Ash. How much of a direct link, can you say a person has on someone else trying to kill themselves? I guess in a way I got off lucky, putting myself so close to someone who does and did behave in that way. But anyway, everything to come. Yeah, 2005, quite an explosive year. And with that said, if you are going through anything like Ash was towards the end of this video, please do seek help. Please do. Suicide is not the answer. It wasn't the answer for him, but how he got saved was a weird story. And it was so cut fine. It was so cut fine, the fact that he got saved at all. And yeah, he's still here on this planet, like well over a decade later, almost 2 decades later now. All of that life and all of that life experience. And, I hope he's happy these days. He certainly had a lot of happy years after that suicide attempt. So if you're going through anything like that, please seek out and know that things get better and all of that. And with that said, I'm going to do a fuck off and go away and leave you. So thank you for listening. Over and out. Bye-bye.